You may have heard the term be a man. You may have heard that or said that yourself. Well, what does that even mean in today's world to be a man? What does it mean to be a good man, to be healthy and whole? And then we get into areas such as masculinity, and you talk about that word, and all of a sudden your social media algorithms filled with all these different opinions and thoughts on what does it mean to be a masculine man, and everybody wants to promote their own vision of what it means to be a man there as well. And there's a lot of noise. What do we believe? What should we believe as Christians? And so, amidst all the confusion, it is my joy to welcome to the show Seth Troutt, author of Authentic Masculinity, Leaving Behind the Counterfeits for God's Design. And I have greatly enjoyed reading this book. Seth, thank you for what you do. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for being on the show with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nate. I believe in the book, and I really hope it'll help men and the women who want to help men and the women who want to be in a relationship with men. And I'm excited for more people to not just read it, but to have it permeate their being and feel confident in who God's designed it to be.
Yes, and you'll get all sorts of thoughts on this topic, as I said before. On one side of the political aisle, you might have a promotion of the effeminate man, where we avoid any of the traditional attributes of manhood because that's toxic. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you'll have the Andrew Tate types that will promote caricatures of masculinity and will push too far in the other direction. And so, Seth, I'll ask you to kind of help us work through all of these things. But before we do so, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I grew up in Arizona and I'm still in Arizona. My dad's a PE teacher. My mom is a preschool teacher. She stayed home most of my childhood. And then I was introduced to church from a young age. I saw Christianity modeled with integrity by my parents. And so I was really kind of born on third base in baseball categories. I had two parents that loved each other, loved the Lord, loved us well. You know, they're sinners who fall short of the glory of God like everybody else. But generally speaking, I feel like I was born into this wonderful position. And so even a lot of these angsty questions about gender, I didn't really have a ton of them growing up as a kid because I just saw a healthy man and a healthy woman loving each other and loving their kids. And then, but I was kind of like loose or mid on my significance to Christianity or how significant Christianity was to me. I really put Christianity in the box of like another school subject. You know, I was pretty good at school and I was pretty good at church because you just hear stuff, remember it, and say the right things. But it was really when one of my close friends in high school got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. We played volleyball together. That I feel like the crisis of meaning and the ultimacy of life and death and the goal of life really became front and center for me and ended up making me. I went and got a philosophy degree, my undergrad, because I was really trying to wrestle with on a deeper level not just the cliches of Christianity, but the how it stood against other arguments, other visions of the life that we were supposed to live. And uh, really, 18 to 21, I was serving at the church. I believed the gospel, but I thought I was going to go be a therapist because everyone kept talking to me about their problems all the time. And I was like, I would like to not butcher this. And so I added on a psychology degree, a developmental psychology degree, because I was thinking people are confiding in me. I want to not make things worse. But it was really around age 21 that I thought I'd heard a series of like probably five or six really bad sermons in a row where I felt like they're kind of butchering the biblical text or they're remarkably boring or irrelevant. I'm like, these are the words of God. How are we not doing this in a compelling and clear, captivating or helpful way? And I went and talked to the elders at my local church and was like, hey, I think I actually want to be a Bible teacher. And my local church, Grace Community in Tempe, where I grew up, actually paid for my seminary, not in full, but really close to in full, invested in me, believed in me. And so I was both a product of like a relatively healthy local family and a relatively healthy local church that was investing in the next generation of Bible teachers and ministers. And so I went to Phoenix Seminary here in the area. And at that time, I was serving as the worship pastor at the church, trying to find ways to serve and do those types of things. And I got married in 2013, and we've been married now almost 13 years. I have two kids, 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, boy and a girl. And I've been working at Ironwood Church in the Southeast Valley for almost 10 years now. And so most of my ministries in local churches, the one I grew up in and the one I'm at now. So I've only been in part of two churches. And lately I've been doing a little more writing, reflecting. I finished my doctorate degree in 2021. I had this like detox period where I felt like I was just sounding too academic, not like myself. And then I started trying to write pastorally a few years ago, which ultimately led to the publication of Authentic Masculinity, where I was trying to help the men in my church, men elsewhere, really think through with clarity and scalability, what does it mean to be a man according to God's design?
Thank you for sharing. I have to confess, when I first saw the book, there was a part of me that groaned a little bit. And maybe it's because I'm on Twitter too much. I'm never calling it X. I think X is a terrible name. Twitter is the name for me. And there's so much bad information out there, bad advice, bad wisdom. And then I get this book and I'm like, all right, let's see what Seth has to say. We'll give it a go.
You know,
But
I just bless that cynicism. I think that's appropriate, generally speaking. So I appreciate your honesty there. But when I was gonna write a masculinity book, I was like, oh, great, here we go, another take. But yeah, so I empathize with your mild cynicism there. So thanks for sharing that.
yes, and so I start to read through these things, and you start with the virtues. We'll get into that, and then you get into the different roles that a man may have, and I'm like, this is really good stuff. And then I kept reading, and I'm thinking, I might need to develop a small group or have some sort of class or however it looks at my church going through this book. So kind of the progression of, wow, this is high quality content. So I want to take a moment to talk to our listeners, our viewers. Maybe that's you and you were kind of cynical the way that I was before reading this book. I'd encourage you to go and check it out. Lots of substantive advice and wisdom here through all of these chapters, and again we'll get into it in just a bit, but go and check it out. So Seth, if you don't mind taking a moment stepping back, is the topic of masculinity so messy right now? Why are we confused? uh I guess I'll leave it there very open-ended for you to do what you want with it. But why is this such a tough topic to talk about?
I think at a basic level, so my doctorate was on the transgender situation or phenomena. Like, why are these young people in particular so tempted to believe that their minds could be right, but their bodies could be wrong about their gender? So that's what I studied at an academic level. And as I got into it, a lot of it is related to just people's bad experience of men in their life and the way that maybe they're underfathered or unfathered, the hotness or like intensity of maybe like the kind of the drill sergeant dad, the domineering father or the absentee father. I do think within the church, there's been, an increasing awareness of the misuse of power as it relates to abuse. But actually, when I talk to a lot of men in my church, they're less suffering from domineering or abusive fathers in their life. Those men are there, but there's more of a pattern of abdication or the non-use of power, the passivity. My dad didn't pursue me. My dad didn't disciple me. My dad didn't love me. My dad, and so it's more like a coldness than so you call it like an abdication versus an abuse. But I think very few people have had the experience of like highly healthy, highly Christ-like men in their life, pouring into them, caring for them, loving them. And so there's a skepticism there within the church. Now, outside of the church, I think you see the caricatures that are displayed. So that's actually the first thing I got invited to speak on related to masculinity in particular was a local church in the area called me up and said, hey, I know you studied gender, and I know that we have this issue in our church. This church probably had, 500 to 1,000 college students, a lot of them men. There's like this Andrew Tate thing, this bleeding into our church. Could you come and speak about the exact prompt I got was why Andrew Tate sucks? Can you come talk about that? And I was like, okay, well, at a minimum, there's just like the smell test. Here you kind of have this peacocking chauvinist type guy. Anybody with a pulse should be able to go, what's the deal with this person? People who have met Jesus in the Gospels immediately go pass. But there's all these young men who are being told, like from the left side of the aisle, that androgyny is good, that masculine distinctives are bad. Then you have a voice like Andrew Tate who's ringing the bell on masculine distinctives are good and men should be not adulterers because they should avoid marriage, but men should kind of do the Genghis Khan thing, have as many kids with as many women as possible, sex, money, power, pursuit at all costs. That to be manly or to be masculine is basically reduced to like an animalistic instinct. And so I think there's confusion where progressives are saying masculinity is a social construct. And then there's also the reaction to the church where it seems like men tend to like assert their power but not leverage their power in a way that Christ would bless. And so it feels like there's this mixed messages thing. And I think there've always been bad voices articulating the essence of masculinity, but with social media in particular, there's so much more noise, like you said, that it's much easier to get algorithm black holed into some wonky vision that's either kind of like a woke revisionist, men aren't really masculine type thing, or just kind of default to a traditionalist view of things that you're going, well, I do think the Bible is conservative, but I'm not sure it's traditionalist. It does challenge assumptions, and it's really confronting to a lot of the assumptions of the day about masculinity. And so trying to thread that needle is difficult. And that's where some of my pastoral burden came was I wanted to build a model that was not really reacting to a cultural moment, but was trying to just summatively articulate God's design for men and how they ought to be in the world. That's the virtues. And then how they ought to function or how they bring those virtues into their various roles, which is the second half of the book. And so I think it's confusing because people are confused, and confused people have microphones and podcasts and catchy social media clips. And so you're bombarded with how do I want to be and who do I want to be? And especially when you're not really secure rooted in your identity as a son of God, it's easy to get tossed to and fro by every wind and wave of doctrine, as Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 4. And my hope was to provide a bit of an anchor in Christ in biblical vision for the people who do want to honor Christ, even if they do feel more tossed than they want to by the spirit of the age that's sending all these mixed messages.
Mm. Yes, well said, explaining different facets and features of what we hear all the time online through social media. I think, again, well said. Now, you go and you talk about being a man, and throughout the book you're also vulnerable, which I appreciate because sometimes we're tempted to create a facade, a show of strength, so to speak, but you also share some of your shortcomings, some of your failures, so I do appreciate the honesty there. That kind of leads us into humility, which is one of the virtues. When we think of virtue, you had Aristotle, he talked about some of the virtues such as courage. Then you had, Aquinas added some of the theological virtues on top of Aristotle. So, virtue, ethics, and theory is rich in Christianity, but you choose several virtues when it comes to masculinity. How and why did you come to these virtues that you write about in your book? And I guess as I say that, I should quickly go through what they are. You have humility, discipline, responsibility, and chivalry. How did you come to those?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, because this is an apologetics podcast, I'll go deep end a little bit here. I would call them the ontological virtues. That's not how I describe them in the book because the book is mostly written for people who are not interested in doing philosophy, but interested in being faithful to Jesus. But in a more academic leaning article, I call them the ontological virtues, the nature of being, because when I was especially trying to create something that was going to meaningfully critique the Andrew Tates of the world, or even just like the passive, effeminate types of the world, I really wanted to create a pyramid that built from a foundation that was rooted in reality. And so when we rightly embrace what a man is in reality, that leads to an accompanying virtue that I think should shape the way a man should feel to other people in the world. And so when I think about virtue, I think about our presence. When I walk into the room, what do people sense and experience of me, gravitas, my energy, my spirit, you could say, my personality. And so the foundation of these virtues, it's a pyramid that goes from humility up to chivalry. The most basic and important distinction in all of reality is the creator creature distinction, that there is a God who is uncreated, who made things. And so when you understand that man is not God, that he is a creature, meaning created, that should cause you to walk with a disposition of humility, that I'm submissive to God. And so that's an ontological reality, that I am not God, that I am limited, I am located, I am finite, I am not all knowing, and that creates a posture of curiosity, a posture of deference, a posture of submission to God's design. And so the foundation really is humility. And that's kind of similar to the Sermon on the Mount, the poor in spirit, this recognition that if there is good in me, it comes from God, that when there is design in me, it comes from God. And so a man should be humble. Now, kind of an additional layer in the humility is recognition of that I'm a sinner in need of grace. And that creates an even deeper layer to that humility. Now, humility is not self-hatred, it's not disdain. I talk about the male black widow who has no sense of self, who gets cannibalized by women, being the opposite to a peacock who's constantly attention seeking, versus like the security of being a son of God, a made, designed, saved by grace son of God. And that humility, in C.S. Lewis's terms, is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. It's a self-forgetfulness, it's a submission to God. And so if I know that man is not God, therefore he should be humble, that's an ontological distinction. The next layer up is discipline. And this kind of came when I was trying to prepare that talk on toxic masculinity. Was a lot of the Google searches you do or some of the content you get is rooted in evolutionary biology, that man is just an advanced animal, a rational animal, and how a lot of things today that are promoting uh, how men can become more masculine, they're actually promoting more animalistic, more beastly, more raw, less inhibited by society. But when you see that man is not just a creature, but he's actually fundamentally unlike all the other creatures, that he's not an animal. You think about Pavlov's dog, ring, bell, drool, that there's a kind of a cause and effect, that animals are governed by instincts and appetites. But man is the moral animal, uh, the image of God creature. That animal or that human, that man can rightly order his loves, he can interrogate his soul, and he can actually function with discipline. And so, discipline, I think, is downstream from rightly ordered affections, rightly ordered desires. That I want to eat 12 donuts, but more than that, I want to function in my job in the afternoon, so I can't. And so, my greater desires supersede my lesser desires, and I act accordingly. So, that's a discipline. So, man is not merely an animal, so we should have discipline. And so in that, I reflect on spiritual disciplines, physical disciplines, that type of thing. So not God, humble, not animal, discipline. And then man is not a boy, he's not a child. And so children can't take responsibility. Children blame shift. Immature men act like children and blaming, but men absorb responsibility, and men can be responsible to care for themselves and for other people. If I send my 6-year-old to the grocery store and say, buy whatever you want, he's going to buy all the wrong things. He doesn't yet have the vision for what it means to take care of himself or other people. But as a man is not a child, he's responsible. And then the tip of the top of the pyramid is that man is not woman, so he needs to be chivalrous. And I get that from 1 Peter 3:7, that man is to show honor to the woman as a weaker vessel. Now that verse is chiefly about marriage. Husbands are to show honor to their wives, living with them in an understanding way. But I like that kind of old medieval term of chivalry, because it is a capacity to leverage strength for good, like in terms of protection, but it's also the capacity to be gentle to those who have less strength than you, especially your wife, your child, the other vulnerable people in society, or different vulnerable people in society. And so those kind of clear distinctions in being, not God humble, not animal discipline, not boy responsible, not woman chivalrous, is where I get those four virtues from. So you could call them the ontological virtues. That's not what they're called in the book, but that's really where that comes from.
Wow. Uh, and I think with each one, we could take our time and walk through. But begin, I want people to go and buy the book. So we'll kind of look at these in an overview kind of way. So I think that's well said. And young ladies out there, if you're watching this, you're listening, these are things also to look for in a man. These traits, these virtues that are developed, and they're not gonna. No one's gonna be perfect. Seth, you mentioned that you had wonderful parents, but they weren't perfect. The young ladies out there, the man you're interested in won't be perfect either. But you should be able to see some of the fruits of this lifestyle, this character that the man you're interested in will have. And so then that's the first part of the book. You go over the virtues. And then secondly, you then go into the masculine roles. You have son, brother, maker, husband, father, all these masculine roles that, depending on your season of life, things will come and go depending on what you're going through. But one of the things I thought was interesting, because son, I get, I'm a son of my parents. Brother, I get, I have three sisters, so I'm a brother to them. So some of them are just, they're going to be there in some way, regardless. But you put maker as well. Can you speak to that a little bit and how important that is when it comes to masculinity to be a maker?
Yeah, all five of those roles, I was surprised as I started writing just how much biblical data there is on all five of them and how much instruction, both in like the wisdom side, what like the prudence, wisdom literature piece of things. But Maker in particular, I think, as men think about the burden to provide for their families that it's really baked in. So in Genesis 1 and 2, there's a shared task assigned to Adam and Eve. They shall be fruitful and multiply. Obviously, that's a shared task. A man can't do that by himself. A woman can't do that by herself. They have to multiply humans through shared endeavor. So the household side, but then there's the subdue and dominion piece, and dominion is about license or authority. That's about delegated authority by God. And subdue is really about applying creative pressure. So the word in Hebrew also is used of like treading grapes or of kneading bread. And this is applying creative force to cause the unformed substance to become more valuable or more consumable in a positive sense. And so that's Genesis 1, the subdue and dominion. That's culture making. Reformed theologians have called that the cultural mandate to make culture. But then in Genesis 3, when the curse of sin happens, the effects of the curse are assigned with disparity. And so most of what's talked about to Eve is that she's going to bear the brunt of the curse at home, right? Pain in childbearing, domineering husbands. And so in the husband section, I talk about how husbands can participate in being a curse to their wife if they're abusive. But on the subdue and dominion side, most of the effects of the curse there are assigned to the man. By the sweat of your brow, you'll bring forth food for your family. With the work of your back, you will be able to undo to do the subdue and dominion thing. It's going to be harder. And so work is blessing. Work is a blessing in Genesis 1 and 2, but then work is cursed in Genesis 3. And the man is assigned the preeminent role to do that. I do think that a lot of the exhortation you get in the wisdom literature is related to working very hard, putting off the sin of sloth. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. That this idea that we get to participate with God and being creators and creatives and makers. And I think that in more recent history, that's conceived of being an employee or an entrepreneur. But for a lot of world history, that was just, being a homesteader, some type of running the family farm, especially in the Americas, something like 80 to 85% of households, even 150 years ago before the Industrial Revolution were doing that type of work. And so a lot of a man's identity, I think, is connected to his capacity to exert power on the creation in a way that is productive and fruitful, or you could call it work, employment, job. And a lot of the men that I know who battle with depression or anxiety, it ends up being work-related issues. When work is not going well, it's when your self-esteem is most likely to dip. When work's going really well, you're more likely to become haughty or arrogant. And so I think having a healthy relationship with work, with subduing dominion, with money, the management of money, the investment of money, the stewardship of money, the fruit of labor, having appropriate balance in your life as you go through different seasons, having little kids, having older kids, being empty nester, navigating those seasons with wisdom and with real effort is a big deal, especially in the digital age where a lot of young men are inclined towards laziness like never before, preeminently because you can doom scroll for hours and hours and hours. You can never watch everything that's on Netflix. So the capacity to just be entertained forever exists in a way that I think is a unique temptation in this cultural moment. And so the call to work hard and cultivate capacity and professional expertise, I do think that bell needs to be rung harder now than it did in previous parts of world history. Because especially if you're a part of Western culture, broadly speaking, you are not going to starve. The government will be your mother if you need it to be. So the nanny state thing is really there. Whereas in other parts of the world or in previous moments of world history, if you didn't work hard, you die. Like that was kind of it. And so the temptation of sloth, I think, is a real thing, especially for younger men, or especially any man with a smartphone and the internet.
Yes. And then so you take all that you said with social media and doom scrolling, then now you also combine it with the abilities of AI to do our thinking and our writing for us. That just adds on top of each other. And so yes, I think that's explained very well. So y'all, you just heard Seth talk about one part of his book about being a maker and all that that means. And there was a lot of richness there. That's every chapter. So we're not going to go over every chapter because I do want you to buy the book, but there's just so much richness there. I keep thinking of the word substance to all these going through the virtues, then going through the roles that a man may be a part of. So again, I think this is a phenomenal book. Authentic Masculinity, leaving behind the counterfeits for God's designs. So, Seth, I'm going to ask you to speak to two different demographics. Uh,
Yeah.
if you were talking to a young man that leans either way. So, the first demographic is it's those from more of the progressive political left. Maybe they grew up with an abusive father and they've seen that domineering, some of the ugliness that can come from that. And their solution is I'm going to run away from what I perceive as toxic masculinity. I'm going to lean more in feminine directions. I'm going to not look for conflict. I'm not going to get angry at all. I'm going to kind of just shy away from that. You use the word androgyny, which I think is a good word for this. And I'm just that what you're saying seems scary. I don't want to be a part of that world. What might you say to people who think like that?
The first thing I'd say on a pastoral level is that really stinks that you were harmed or by either the activity or the inactivity of the men in your life. And what I want that man in particular to hear and know is Ephesians 2:10 says that God has prepared great works for you beforehand that you should walk in them. And I think that God's design for every man is full of dignity and nobility and value. And that some people are born on third base, some people are born rounding third, some people are born with two strikes, and it's going to be difficult. And so when you're dealt a difficult hand, you have more to overcome. And I don't want people with a lot to overcome to embrace a victim mentality, meaning I can just like sit back and let my life happen to me. Instead, I want to go, you have more to overcome. And with the Lord's help, you can overcome that. That the misdirection or the poor family history that you inherited, you can be the one to break that. You can be the one to rightly use your power, not to misuse it, not to abdicate use of it, but to actually use power in a way that's congruent with the way of Jesus, with that's controlled by the fruit of spirit, full of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. You can do that, and you can be that type of man who is full of capacity to break generational patterns and establish new trajectories. And what you pass on to your kids can and should and will be better than what you have received. And that's one of my goals for my son is that he would be better than me. And I don't take that as an insult or an affront, but I think part of the way he honors his father is by working to be better than him, than to give his kids better than what I've given to him. And so, especially if you're thinking, I'm going to run away from God's design towards a more inherently progressive view. I do think there are some of those things. Like I do most of the cooking in my house. And so I'm not recommending some like traditionalist 1950s leave it to beaver version of masculinity, right? Like I do most of the cooking. I like it. I don't think that's feminine or effeminate. I think that's just I'm a better cook than my wife. She knows it. I know it. I enjoy it. She hates it. The end. So the answer isn't like to embrace traditionalist prescriptive in the minutia gender roles, but to go, no, there is wisdom from God on how I can be a friend to my brothers and a friend to my sisters, and I can embrace God's design for my life. But I think running towards meaninglessness or aimlessness is kind of like choosing to live in the dark when you have access to the light. And we're not called to rediscover these things afresh, but God has given it to us in His Word. And so I do think God's design is inherently liberating, not oppressive. And if you're tempted to read God's design as oppressive, you just haven't quite understood it yet. And that's one of my hopes for the book is that someone who was wounded by maybe a more patriarchal or traditionist vision, that you might see that God has wisdom for you that will help you be the best version of you. And you're probably not going to be able to make a 180-degree shift based on what you were given, but you can make a really meaningful course correction, and generations can be impacted by your endeavors and your efforts. And so, if not for you and your faithfulness, think about society, your kids, your grandkids, your neighbors, that you being the healthiest man that you can be serves people that you won't even be able to fully understand. That when you stand before the Lord in the last day, He might show you the generational tree that you've created because of your work to become a healthy, God-fearing man. And I just don't want to put a limit on the possibility of how God might use each individual and the way that they faithfully inhabit their various roles within households, societies, and neighborhoods and churches.
Mm. I like what you said, full of hope, full of possibility and promise, and directing people to a, healthier vision of what it means to be a man. Now I'm going to ask you about the other end of the spectrum. Let's say you're talking to people or someone who they look at Andrew Tate and they're like, I kind of like that. Sleeping around, not getting married, kind of do my own thing. I accumulate wealth. I wear a nice watch, drive a nice car. I have a mansion, so on and so forth. Kind of feels good. Women are a means to an end, the end being my pleasure. I like that view of masculinity. I want to be more like them. What might you say to people who think like this?
Yeah, I think that the flesh wants what it wants. And I think we have to be honest in naming our desires, even when they're unhealthy or even when they're explicitly evil, right? If I want to be rich and oppress people, then I need to be honest about that to myself and to God. And I go, I think I want these things. But here's the deal. I think that someone who's trying to follow Jesus is recognizing that Jesus is actively working on our desires. That's the first thing Jesus asks in the Gospel of John is, what are you seeking? What do you want? And I think part of what he's signaling there is, I'm here to work on your wanter. I'm here to fix and labor and tweak and improve on your desires. And I think that's the Psalm says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. That's not God as a genie in a bottle. That is, when we delight in God, He changes our desires over time. And so if you're looking at Andrew Tate and you're going, what he has, I want it. Here's what I want to encourage you to do is go, first of all, we should not be acting on what we want. We should be acting on what we want to want. And so there's one thing to say, I want this. There's nothing to say, I want to want something else. And I feel like that's a part of my life as a Christian. Is there things I want that I shouldn't want? But more than that, I'm going, what I want is intimacy with Christ, closeness with Him, faithfulness to Him. I want to be the honorable man God wants me to be. And so that's, I think, a healthy framework for myself and processing through temptations, disordered desires, is to name them, pray through them, process them. And the thing that I want us to understand in particular about like the Andrew Tate womanizing sex, money, power thing is you read the book of Ecclesiastes, the one who had the most women, the one who had the most money, and he's the one who's at the end of his life going, this is empty. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the mouth with eating. Basically, to say, nor the wallet with accumulating. That's my addition to that book, is going, if you really believe that that will lead to a satisfying, enjoyable life, I have news for you. It just doesn't. That those promises overpromise and underdeliver. And actually, the good life is found in following Christ in the details of my life, even though the enemy and the lies of the culture want to tell me that the rich and good life is found elsewhere. And so, some men will have to sin a lot before they learn that sin is empty and non-satisfying. My preference would be that men would be wise enough to listen to wisdom. I think ideally you learn from the mistakes of other people before you learn from your own mistakes. Like that's, I think, what a lot of the wisdom literature is. You go, here's this wise, rich, powerful man, and he's inviting us to learn from his mistakes. And that if I'm a wise man, I'm able to learn from other people's mistakes, and I don't just as a child double down and going, well, I have to learn the hard way myself. And I hope that men can recognize that the wisdom of the scriptures, not just the authority of the scriptures, but the wisdom of Jesus, is that he is inviting us into the good life. And I think we misunderstand the law of God. We tend to project onto that like American law, which is people somewhere else write these arbitrary codes that inhibit our ability to do what we want. The speed limit's 45. I want it to be 55. That's annoying. But when I understand the word law through more of a Hebrew biblical framework, it's Torah, it's fatherly instruction, it is teaching that the Father in heaven, the wise, all knowing being, is giving me guidance on how to best live my life. Now it's not just kind of arbitrary law, but now it's fatherly teaching that's meant to form me into the man I'm supposed to be. And so, recognizing the temptation to worldliness, naming it, trying to repent of it by bringing it to God honestly in prayer, but then trying to be wise and not a fool and allow what we want to shape our behaviors, not just our core, more fleshly instincts to shape what they are. Otherwise, we're just being like a sophisticated animal, an animal with language, an animal with a savings account. And I don't want that for me. I don't want that for anybody. But I want to allow the vision of God to be the authoritative purpose and goal in my life. And I just honestly think that it's better to follow Jesus than to do anything else.
Hmm. It's better to follow Jesus than to do anything else. I think that's a great way of finishing that answer there. Yeah, I'm not going to say I've read dozens and dozens of books on masculinity. I haven't, but I have read several. And this perhaps has been my favorite, so I highly recommend it. Seth, who's with us now, author of Authentic Masculinity, Leaving Behind the Counterfeits for God's Design. He goes over the virtues. We talked about that a little bit. He goes over the different roles, and we just touch the surface of all that he covers in the book. So really, I'd consider buying it. Also, maybe it's a great small group type of book as well for men to come together, maybe with your son or with your brother, with friends, to come together and talk about these things. Seth, I really appreciate your time. I'll ask if people want to learn more about you, follow what you're doing, maybe future books that you might write. Where can they go to learn more about you?
Yeah, so my website, Seth Troutt, TROUTT.com, is a great way to sign up for email updates there. I'm on X. I'm pretty active on X. I'm on Instagram. I'm getting more active there. But I have other books in the hopper, and I'm regularly producing other resources designed especially for young men. Like I've done a 40-day No More Deadbeat Dad challenge thing. I have a 7-day sloth killer thing for men who are struggling to work hard. I have a Domains of Discipline workbook that's meant to support the resources here in this book. And so I do think the book is a lot of my heart and soul, especially to men, but I'm regularly thinking through other resources that might equip men to be more faithful in the details of their life. And so if they follow me on any or all of those, they'll get the updates on my ongoing work.
I'll make sure when I go to publish this conversation to have that information in the description for the episodes. Seth, thank you for your time and talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. I love what you're doing here. Apologetics, it's the good, the true, and the beautiful. And a lot of apologetics get stuck on the true, but I do think trying to see that the way of Christ is more beautiful and it's good, it's not just true, is a big part of apologetics. And so I'm thankful for your voice in this arena, and I hope a lot of men and women are captivated by it.
Well, I do appreciate that. Christianity, it's great to think through, but also we walk with the Lord and we use our hands and our feet to try to change lives and impact others, salt and light. So, Seth, it's been wonderful. Y'all, Nate Williams here, director of the Apologetics Resource Center. Keep on coming by as weeks go on. We'll have more episodes for you. But until next time, God bless and take care.